For a while, I didn't like much of anything. Not in a depressed way, not in a numb way, just neutral. Music played and it was fine. Food tasted the way food tastes. Conversations happened without pulling me toward or away. Nothing stood out enough to grab hold of. At first, I thought something was wrong. I wondered if I'd lost interest in life, or if awareness had flattened everything into sameness. But there was no sadness attached to it, no frustration, just the absence of pull. I hadn't realized how tightly preference used to be tied to identity, how liking something meant this is me, and disliking something meant this is not. Without that structure, preference had quietly stepped back. Things no longer asked to be chosen. For a time, that felt strangely empty, like walking through a room where the furniture had been moved, but the floor was still solid. Nothing demanded engagement. Nothing repelled me either. Life just unfolded in front of me without commentary. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, small preferences began to reappear. Not loudly, not with excitement, just a slight leaning. I noticed I lingered longer over certain sounds, that some spaces felt easier to be in than others, that certain moments held my attention without effort. There was no announcement when this started, no return of passion, just subtle inclinations that didn't ask to be followed. What surprised me was how different they felt. They weren't claims. They weren't definitions. They didn't say anything about who I was. They were simply movements, like the body shifting its weight without instruction. I didn't rush to name them. I didn't try to build a story around them. I let them come and go. In the past, preference carried responsibility. If I liked something, I felt compelled to pursue it. If I lost interest, I worried I was abandoning a part of myself. Now preference feels optional. I can enjoy something without protecting it. I can move away without guilt. Nothing is at stake. This has changed how I relate to choice. Choices no longer feel like forks in the road. They feel more like turns of the head. I don't worry about choosing wrong, because nothing is being secured by choosing right. Life doesn't hinge on alignment anymore. It just continues. I still notice enjoyment, still notice aversion, but neither of them linger long enough to harden into identity. They pass through like weather, and I don't chase them. There was a time when I believed preference would return as purpose, that something would rise up and declare itself meaningful. But meaning didn't come back that way. Instead, there's a softness to engagement now. I can do things because they feel okay to do, not because they say something about me, not because they promise growth, just because they're there. Sometimes that looks like listening to something familiar. Sometimes it looks like doing nothing at all. Both feel equally valid. The absence of urgency has changed how pleasure feels too. Pleasure no longer needs to peak. It doesn't need contrast. It's quieter, less satisfying in the dramatic sense, but more stable. There's no crash afterward, no sense that something needs to be repeated or preserved. Enjoyment comes and leaves without residue. I've noticed that when preference isn't tied to identity, disappointment doesn't sting the same way. If something doesn't land, it doesn't say anything about me. It just didn't land. There's no story to protect. This makes space for curiosity without expectation. I can explore without hoping to find myself in what I'm doing. And if nothing sticks, that's fine. Nothing needs to stick. There are still days when preference fades entirely, when nothing pulls and nothing repels. Those days don't worry me anymore. They don't feel like regression. They feel like rest. Preference doesn't need to be constant to be real. Comes and goes naturally like appetite. Trying to force it back only distorts it. I see now how often people chase preference because they're afraid of neutrality. Afraid that without strong likes or passions, life will become empty. But neutrality isn't emptiness. It's openness without direction. And direction can reappear on its own. When it does, it doesn't ask for commitment. It just shows up. I don't feel more myself when I like something again. I don't feel less myself when I don't. The idea of myself has loosened. Preference no longer defines the boundary. And without that boundary, there's a surprising amount of freedom. I can move toward what's present without asking where it leads. I can move away without feeling like I'm losing something essential. Nothing is being built. Nothing is being dismantled. Life is simply expressing itself through small movements of attention. The quiet return of preference doesn't bring answers. It doesn't restore identity. It just adds texture back into the day. And that texture doesn't need to be curated. It doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't even need to be noticed. It's enough that it comes when it comes, and leaves when it leaves. I don't follow preference anymore. I let it walk alongside me. Sometimes it stays close. Sometimes it wanders off. Either way, the path doesn't disappear. I'm still here, living, not defined by what I enjoy, not diminished by what I don't, just moving through days as they arrive, and letting preference be what it is, a quiet visitor, not a compass. If this reflection met you where you are, you're already part of this space. You don't need to hold on to it, and you don't need to return. But if you do, these reflections will still be here.